Good morning, everyone. Delighted to see so many of you here this morning. It really is so gratifying to see the interest in our keynote speaker today, Enrico Giovannini, who we are delighted to welcome here to Dublin. I'd like to also thank very much the Royal College of Physicians for making this venue so special for us here today. I know that it is quite overwhelming to come and visit a place like this, and we are delighted that they were able to facilitate us. One interesting piece of information that I just got in the green room before coming here is that the Royal College of Physicians was the first college to allow women to enter and join to become doctors in Ireland. So, and that was way back hundreds of years ago. So I think it's probably fitting that this is the venue we have chosen for today's annual lecture. Just a few very short housekeeping notes. If you can make sure your phones are turned off in terms of deference to our speakers, please. And also, if you don't feel that you need or want to have photos taken of you or videos, please do make yourself known to anyone with a red lanyard. Otherwise, we will be doing it with impunity and publishing on our social media channels. We will also be on social media, so if you wish to join us there, please do so on LinkedIn, Twitter, X, or wherever else you publish. So I would like to welcome you all, ambassadors, particularly government officials, representatives of the social partners, civil society, research institutes, members of our partner and stakeholder organizations, the European Commission, the European Parliament, the European Movement, and of course distinguished members of the Oireachtas. We are really very, very happy to have you here all with us today. I would also, of course, like to give a very special welcome to Professor Enrico Giovannini, who is our guest speaker today. He will be introduced by my director later on, but really we are very honored to have you here in person, so thank you for joining us. A big thank you also to our own Minister, Minister for European Affairs and Defence, Thomas Byrne, who is a second-time Minister here on European affairs, and we're delighted that he has also been able to join us. Indeed, we would also like to welcome and thank all our colleagues from the Department of Foreign Affairs, in particular Tim and Maeve, who have joined us here today. Our collaboration ongoing with the Department of Foreign Affairs makes our job here in Ireland so much easier. It's a particular special year this year for us. Here, Eurofound is celebrating its 50th milestone, 50 years anniversary of living and working in Europe. We continue to contribute, we hope, to the improvement of living and working conditions across the European Union, and this is just one way that we do it, having debate, putting ideas out there, and ensuring that there is good discussion and dissemination of those ideas. So today, Ivailo, my director, will open proceedings. He will set the scene with some words on living and working in Europe. He will then be followed by the minister, and then we will hear from our guest speaker. So without much further ado, I would like to say Fáilte Róid, Minister, we buchas le linn aniu. August, I'd like to invite you to address us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary, and thank you, Executive Director Ivailo Calfin, for hosting, I think, this important event in this beautiful building, which I've been in, luckily, on a number of occasions, but it is fantastic to be here right in the city of Dublin. It's always a pleasure. I'm back again, as you said, to engage with Eurofound. And I'm glad to be here to launch and open the third lecture. I think I did the first one, and I'm glad to be back again. Anche voglio estendere il mio personale benvenuto al professore Enrico Giovannini. Il professore è venuto da Roma. Roma è una città molto speciale per me perché mi sono sposato a Roma in 2006. So just welcome to Professors come from Rome. It's a very special city for me too, Professor, as I was married there in 2006. And I look forward very much to what you have to say today. The theme of the lecture, Living and Working in Europe, Rethinking Progress for a Sustainable and Equitable Future, it couldn't be more timely or more relevant to the challenges we face as a union. We find ourselves at a moment of profound transformation for Europe. Traditional measures of success are being questioned, and so by working together, I think we must chart a course that balances economic dynamism with social cohesion and environmental sustainability. In charting that course, your work at Eurofound has never been more crucial than it is today. And I do want to recognise what a milestone year it is for Eurofound, marking 50 years of pioneering research and evidence-based policy support. Eurofound is, of course, the only EU agency headquartered in Ireland, and we are proud that you call Ireland home. I'm constantly telling people they should work for the European Union institutions, and I'm saying, well, it's Brussels and Luxembourg, yes, and Strasbourg, but it's also Dublin and some other places too, and I'm certainly thinking of Eurofound in that context. As Ireland has grown, in many ways we've grown thanks to our European Union membership, but so too has your work in Eurofound grown alongside the European project itself. I am mindful today especially of the legacy of Dr. Patrick Hillery, former President of Ireland, but his instrumental role in securing agreement to the Social Action Plan in 1973 as Commissioner led to the establishment of Eurofound 2 years later. It is just one poignant example of the contribution that Irish citizens have made to the development of our union. And it's a point I make all the time, that the European Union has influenced and pushed Ireland along, but it's Irish people also within the institutions have helped that work too. In seeking to secure the further development of our union, the need for institutions that provide reliable and evidence-based analysis is very clear, and that's why your work is of such importance. Over the past 50 years of our EU membership, Ireland's journey illustrates both the promise and the complexity of rethinking progress. We've witnessed extraordinary economic transformation, from a largely agricultural economy to a modern, knowledge-based society that serves as a European hub for technology, pharmaceuticals, and international services. But this transformation has also brought challenges that traditional economic metrics struggle to capture. Professor Giovannini's focus on measuring well-being resonates deeply with Ireland's experience. While our GDP growth has been remarkable, the true measure of our success lies in whether this prosperity translates into better lives for our citizens. Delivering better outcomes for our citizens is the goal of government, and that is what we're working to do. Reconciling economic transition with economic growth and social prosperity sits at the heart of European policy making today. In working to decarbonise our economy, develop new technologies, and adapt to global changes, we must not leave any community or person behind. In this context, I'm heartened that Eurofound's 2024 e-survey on the quality of life in the EU found that in Ireland, satisfaction with democracy continues to remain strong across the general public, and thank the heavens for that. Irish respondents reported 5.7 out of 10 in this area, compared to the EU average of 4.5. Irish people are increasingly optimistic about their future, with Ireland reporting the highest levels of optimism across the EU 27 as part of the survey's well-being assessment. Against today's challenging geopolitical backdrop, the question of European competitiveness has taken on a new urgency. Your Italian colleagues and former colleagues in government as well, the Letta and Draghi reports lay bare the challenge for Europe. We need to become more resourceful, more productive and more competitive. As Ireland prepares for our presidency next year, we will play a key role in shaping how Europe responds to the challenge. We do want to cut unnecessary red tape to deliver better outcomes for business and EU citizens. But that does not mean deregulation, it means better regulation. The challenges facing Europe today are unprecedented in their complexity, but they also present opportunities. Climate change demands decarbonisation while maintaining economic vitality. Demographic change requires us to rethink work, retirement, and intergenerational solidarity. Technological transformation offers great benefits too, but also threats. The green transition can create millions of quality jobs if we invest wisely in renewable energy, energy efficiency, and the circular economy. Digital transformation can make work more flexible and fulfilling if we ensure that workers have the skills and protections that they need. An ageing society can benefit from the wisdom and experience of older workers if we create age-friendly workplaces and combat discrimination. Eurofound's research will continue to be crucial in navigating these transitions. As I said, we look forward to our presidency in the second half of next year, and we do see an opportunity to demonstrate leadership in rethinking progress. Our EU presidency will coincide with crucial negotiations on the next multi-annual financial framework, discussions on the future of the common agricultural policy, and notwithstanding what I said earlier about Ireland changing from being a predominantly agricultural economy, the common agricultural policy is still critically important to us, and I want that message to go out loud and clear. An ongoing work, of course, on European competitiveness. The importance of Ireland shaping the EU extends far beyond our formal presidency. We will work to influence European policy every day as a member state through our active participation in all EU institutions and processes. I'm focused on using our presidency to advance the substantive agenda that Europe needs. Our guiding principle will be to prioritise our work as presidency on those areas where we judge we can best advance a policy agenda for Europe and its citizens. I'm particularly focused on ensuring that our presidency addresses the concerns of citizens across Europe. Too often, decision-making can feel remote from the daily lives of ordinary people, and we need to show that European integration can deliver concrete benefits in jobs, in living standards, in security and opportunity. We need to show that the presidency, that the Council, is just one of those institutions that's making laws from the ground up, elected by the people, but making laws in all of our best interests in a democratic process. Our preparatory work for the presidency includes engagement with a wide range of stakeholders, and I'm committed to ensuring that Irish voices are heard throughout the process. Ireland has had 7 successful EU presidencies in our track record already, and I know that our 8th presidency will be another successful and impactful one. But success will be measured not just by the smooth running of meetings or our hospitality, it will be measured on the progress we've made in tackling the challenges that Europe faces. In working to deliver better outcomes and prosperity for our citizens, the work of Eurofound will continue to be of profound importance and value, and I really want to renew my thanks for all your work. So again, I say this in Irish inish, Wala mo fáilte chur riv an tullav Giovannini a ríis, agus mo bhuichas a gháil le Eurofound as an cuire bheith ag léirt liv an seo in Neomh, agus asúla an go léir le cadatá le rá ag an olav in Neomh. Go raibh míle maith.
Thank you very much, and Minister Byrne, Professor Giovannini, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Can I first start by thanking Professor Giovannini, Minister Byrne, for accepting our invitation and being here for the annual lecture, Living and Working in Europe, organized for the 3rd time by Eurofound this year. We organized this lecture for a purpose. Our idea is to invite a European visionary and together with our stakeholders in Ireland to reflect about the bigger picture, where Europe stands and where Europe goes in the future. Sometimes, in order to see clearer, you need to take a step backwards. And this is also very important for the research work that we are doing, also to see it in a context, which is a political context, a social context, an economic context, and the way Europe develops. So we started in 2023. Our first lecture was presented by the Irish economist, Professor Bridget Lafan, who was the president of the Robert Schuman Center at the European European University Institute in Florence. Then next year we had a Bulgarian political scientist and writer Ivan Krastev, and this is our 3rd lecture with the Italian professor with experience in the government and with extremely interesting research on well-being and everything which happens beyond the GDP, Professor Giovannini. And again, thank you very much, Professor Giovannini, for being with us today. Uh, Mr. Minister, I would like to personally thank you for your participation today and for the very kind words you said for the work of Eurofound. As an EU agency hosted in Dublin, we highly appreciate the continuous support and cooperation with the Irish government. The agency, our staff and their families, we have excellent conditions to work and live in Ireland, and this is very highly appreciated. On our side, we actively play our role to support the Irish government and other national stakeholders, IBEC, ICTU among them, in their everyday work and endeavors. We are also engaged in promoting the European Union understanding and debate in Ireland, opening our doors to various professional, civil society and community groups. Last Friday, we had our Open Doors Day at Loughlinstown, where we hosted more than 300 people that came to see and to ask questions about our work. I would like also to thank the Department of Foreign Affairs, the Institute for International and European Affairs, and the European Movement Ireland, with whom we very much partner, including for the Open Day last week that I mentioned. Mr. Minister, you spoke about the forthcoming Irish presidency of the Council of the European Union, and traditionally Eurofound is very much committed to supporting the presidencies, of course in the area of work and competence that we have. Our work already covers some of the major priorities that are now on the political agenda, like the quality job roadmap, the anti-poverty strategy, the housing strategy, the new action plan for the European Pillar of Social Rights. All this falls into our ongoing work. We also keep working on critical sectors and the employment situation in these critical sectors, the labor shortages across Europe, the critical role of some important services like care services, etc., etc. So all this analysis, of course, depending on the timing of the agenda during the Irish presidency, is going to be very much at the disposal of the presidency. The way we work currently with the Polish presidency and with the Danish already preparing next political round. But as we know, life is what happens while we make plans. So I absolutely expect to have some additional, probably not expected items that would come. This happens every time. Hopefully, they are not going to be very much worrying, but I would like to tell you that Eurofound is very much at your disposal whenever something is covered by our research in order to support the substantial work of the presidencies. The 7 Irish presidencies until now left a mark in Europe with the first elections for the European Parliament, the European support for the German reunification, the introduction of the euro, and of course the Big Bang, the enlargement of 2004. All of this happened during Irish presidencies, and that left a mark in Europe. Myself, I have vivid personal memories for the invaluable support of my country, that my country received from the Irish government before joining the European Union more than 18 years ago. For me, it's also important as a Bulgarian citizen because Bulgaria is on its way to join as 21st member of the Eurozone next year. Again, that's going to be very much linked with the Irish presidency of the Council. So I wish every success to the presidency and again, the readiness of Eurofound to be of support. The lecture of Professor Giovannini today will focus on sustainable and equitable future for the European Union. This topic is very close to the hearts of Eurofound. Researching life of the European citizens beyond GDP and other macroeconomic parameters is in our DNA for 50 years. Our research on the working and living conditions sees them through the eyes of the citizens, the businesses, the workers, because we collect our information from surveys that we do on a regular basis across Europe with massive information, but we look at Europe through the eyes of the citizens, again, businesses, workers, that are our stakeholders. They don't look very much at GDP or the macroeconomic parameters. And this is the information that we get. That's why I think our research is also very instrumental that we provide to the decision makers when it comes to the public perceptions. And indeed, in many countries, beyond the macroeconomic parameters, and this is seen, we witness it in all the countries, there are many other important things that are important for people. This is the quality of work, the work-life balance, the access to housing, especially for young people, the access to care services for everyone, what happens with people that are aging at work, and if there are different policies for them and how they can be accommodated. But also bigger issues that we see of concern for the European citizens. I mean, we've seen it also through COVID, during COVID and all this cascade of crises that came after 2008 in Europe, related with general political stability, with fairness, justice, with the cohesion in the society, because the shocks usually open many gaps in the societies, which is not very positively accepted again by the public perceptions. So all this is part of the way European citizens look at Europe and at the European Union. And here it's very important to have a discussion. And that's why we very much focus on this discussion. Because, political governance and political management is very much dependent and should be dependent also on the impact of the citizens. So this position of the citizen is very important, and that's why we are very happy to discuss these issues today. Probably one of the best speakers in Europe about exactly what happens beyond the GDP and this macroeconomic stability, which is of course very important, is Professor Giovannini, that we have the chance to host today here. Professor Giovannini was twice minister in Italy. If you wonder what is common between two very famous Italian prime ministers recently, Mr. Draghi and Mr. Letta, one thing, of course, is that they wrote 2 reports that were asked by the European Commission. The other thing is that Mr. Giovannini served within both governments and could make the bridge between these two. But also Professor Giovannini is a very notorious economist, statistician, being for 8 years chief statistician of OECD, chairing the Italian Statistical Society. He's member of the Club of Rome. He's bearer of the highest Italian reward that he received after his, I think it was after your ministership, or at some point. So this is indeed a person who can speak lots about, not only about the statistical information that we have, but about how it impacts lives, how it impacts people, how we could see it, let's say, in a more close to everybody way, and not only in the macroeconomic parameters. So with this, I would like, before giving the floor to Professor Giovannini, to thank the Ambassador of Italy for the very good suggestion and the cooperation for organizing also this event. And with this, I would like to invite Professor Giovannini for your lecture. Professor Giovannini, please.
Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's an honor. And happy birthday to Eurofound for this 50th anniversary. Thank you very much, Minister, for your speech. And I will address some of the points that you made, because I'm going to speak on the most political issue that you can imagine, which is about statistics. The origin of the word statistics is a science of the state of things, but also state with capital S. And this is why I believe, that the Irish presidency could take forward some of the points that I will mention, because, as I said, this is the most political issue that we have at stake, I think, today, beside defense, unemployment, inequalities, climate change, is really at the core of politics. couple of weeks ago, I was in a meeting when another former Prime Minister of Italy, Paolo Gentiloni, who was commissioner in the first von der Leyen's commission, said that a Chinese person told him, we will never take two former ministers to say how bad China is. And this is exactly what the Letta and Draghi report made, in a sense, showing our problems, but maybe, in my view, underlining a little bit too much that we look much worse than the United States, which is not true. And this is exactly the point that today is very high on the agenda, while the United States is behaving as it behaves. What we know is that we are confronted with a very, very complicated world, and as Einstein said, that we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used to create them. One of the problems why we feel a little bit lost or bombarded by shocks is because we never thought about the complexity of the system in which we live. The use of GDP as a measure, it was a way, I will come back on this later, to simplify a system which is complex. And now we discovered how complex it is, because we have to take into account the environmental dimension, the social dimension, and even the institutional dimension, because everything looks trembling. Everything seems at risk. And we are discovering how much these different elements are correlated, intertwined, because what we built, fortunately, is a complex system. And the complex system has its own rules, and are systems whose behavior is intrinsically difficult to model. We tried as economists to model our economy using, for example, linear models. But we know now that the natural systems are nonlinear, that the social systems are nonlinear. And I would like to thank Eurofound for the work done. I used the research made by you several times, because as Pope Francis said just in a sentence, everything is connected. And now we are discovering that this is absolutely true. In 2015, after stepping down as minister, I was working as consultant to the President's Juncker think tank, where we developed a framework to talk about resilience and sustainable development. The former head of cabinet of President Juncker, after a conference I organized, told me, you have to stop talking about resilience and sustainability, because the European Commission will never embrace these concepts. I left that think tank. I started working with a joint research center, and for 4 years we developed a new policy framework about vulnerability and resilience. And when the pandemic started, the cabinet of von der Leyen, of course they were knowing what we were doing, decided to pick up this idea of resilience, and then you know why Resilience and Recovery Facility is called like that. Where did we start from that? Think about the 2008, which kind of crisis we had? Of course, the financial crisis. 2010, the euro crisis. 2015, nobody gets this, because we are thinking about economic crisis, asylum crisis, migration and was putting at risk the European institutions, although the flow was 0.5 of the total EU population, about non-linearities. 2020, of course, pandemic. 2022, war. It's just bad luck, or we have a problem. And what's next? Of course, we are facing what's next these days. The work that we did at the JRC helped in framing, also through statistics, indicators of vulnerability and resilience to try to frame how policies should address these continuously repeated shocks. Because the point is that for 50 years, we faced rare shocks. Yes, we had the oil shocks and so on, but they were coming once in a few years. But now it looks a very different world. I think that everybody knows the 2030 Agenda with its 17 goals that cover economic, social, environmental, and institutional dimensions. But normally, these are seen as a sort of list of targets that have to be achieved. It's much more than that. Look at this chart that looks very complicated, but it's just our world. We exchange with the rest of the universe solar energy and waste heat. Then what we do internally on our Earth is to combine natural capital, human capital, social capital, and produce capital to produce GDP, goods and services. We reinvest part of it to rebuild the capital that we used, and the rest is consumed for our well-being. Okay? This is what macroeconomic textbooks talk about, more or less. But while we consume, while we produce, we create wastes. Physical wastes, but again, as Pope Francis said, also human wastes. And they affect our well-being. Moreover, the waste, physical waste, have an impact on ecological services, and the scheme until now is known to ecological economists since 1980. I had to add one little box, which is about the social system services, which means peace, trust, all the things that we don't pay attention to unless we lose them. Now, if we put the 17 Sustainable Development Goals on this scheme, we understand that some of them address human capital, social capital, and Eurofound worked a lot on these issues. Of course, you have education, health, and other elements, but you also have GDP and employment. Energy is at the core of the system. Infrastructures, innovation, of course, are extremely important. Inequalities are extremely relevant for our well-being, and so on and so forth. Okay? Now, if this is a reasonable approximation of the system where we live, can GDP summarize this? Of course, it cannot. So why are we using this? Because in 1944, this is a book that describes the story, the US government called the British and the American economists. They were locked in a room because they had different views on how GDP had to be calculated. Finally, the government of the United States, the Department of Commerce, decided to go for the British solution, based on the amount of production, instead of the American solution based on consumption and well-being. Simon Kuznets is normally seen as the father of GDP. He was the loser. He was not even invited to the second meeting. And why did the American government decided to go for the British approach because their political problem was demonstrate that capitalism was able to produce more stuff than communism, period. That was the problem. And GDP indeed captured this kind of elements. Is it possible that in 2025 we are still trapped by this kind of approach? Fortunately, the work done over the last 25 years on these issues, I started the Beyond GDP movement worldwide when I was chief statistician at the OECD in 2001, produced a lot of evidence, conceptual frameworks, and we now have so many statistics that could be used to go beyond what was decided in 1944. Of course, the current GDP is very different from what was decided at the time. And I mentioned before to the Italian ambassador that when I was chief the statistician of the OECD in 2008, when we decided the semi-last version of the SNA, the System of National Accounts, the last one was agreed just 3 months ago, I fighted to include in GDP military expenditures as investment. It was a huge discussion. Others were saying, no, this is going to pollute GDP. And we were saying, but people who work in military firms consume and like anybody else. So we won. In GDP figures now, military expenditures are included. What if we lost? We would have said over the last 3 years, oh, look, European sanctions of Russia made a huge impact because GDP of Russia would have fallen dramatically, while everybody says, oh, European sanctions didn't have any impact simply because Russia increased its military expenditure, therefore GDP went up. Just to tell you how influenced we are by this measure. Now, can we do something different? Yes, we can. The Italian Alliance for Sustainable Development that I established in 2016 to implement in Italy, to implement the 2030 agenda in Italy, using Eurostat data and many other data, for example, builds these composite indicators of the different SDGs. The dots are the EU countries, and the lines are the averages. So we can build this kind of dashboards of indicators to know whether Europe or each and every country is progressing or worsening vis-à-vis what has been agreed at world level and what has been included in the EU policies, up to the point that commissioners in their mission letters from Ursula von der Leyen gets a couple of lines saying you are responsible to achieve this. Is this satisfactory? Does it answer the question, is EU or US, is EU better than US or not? Of course it doesn't, because we try to capture in single numbers, this is the power of a single number, what we want. At the JRC, we made this kind of attempt to show what if we included in GDP national accounts the different life expectancy that we have in Europe vis-à-vis United States, but the same India and China also looking at the future. Look at the figures. Those at the top are the annual growth rate of GDP or extended GDP adjusting for life expectancy, and it would be clear that Europe has much better perspectives than US. The UK Statistical Office made an incredible effort to expand the current system of national accounts. And they ended with this concept of net inclusive income of households instead of net disposable income, which is the normally used figure. What they found is that net inclusive income is much broader than disposable income because it includes a lot of elements that make households better off or worse off, including the unpaid work, but also the work done by volunteers and so on and so forth. Okay, we could expect this kind of result. But what they calculated is that the net inclusive income comes from the national accounts based figures only for 55%, which means that we are missing 45% of what makes households better off or worse off. So we are not missing a negligible element. We are missing a huge part, even higher, as you can see, since 2008, 2009, than what households get from the market. Well, this is quite significant, and this is completely out of the radar screens of economists and ministers and public debate. We are lucky in Europe because our treaty, Article 3 of the treaty, which makes me proud of being European, doesn't say the Union aim is to promote peace, its values and GDP, but it says the well-being of its peoples. And the rest of Article 3, I would invite you to read it, quotes almost all the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So our concept of well-being is embedded in our Constitution. Do policies try to reach what Article 3 of the treaty says? No, not necessarily. This is the point. This is the political point. This is why I hope that the Irish presidency will make this point at the center of EU policies during its mandate. The good news is that we have been working on these issues over the last 3 years after, let's say, the success of our work on resilience, and we have developed this concept of sustainable and inclusive well-being, which is now also, this is confirmed by several EU-funded projects like WISE or MERGE and so on. This is the concept that we have to look at. Sustainable and inclusive well-being. Why? Because this includes both the intragenerational distribution of well-being as well as the intergenerational concept of well-being, which is inclusiveness and sustainability. We tried to develop this framework just starting from the Article 3 of the treaty. So this is the EU vision of how well-being should be. And it's not the same of the GDP chosen by the Americans in 1944. You see how politically relevant is what we are talking about? This system measures both the well-being today and the elements that allow us to have a well-being tomorrow. You drive cars, do you? Yes? Okay, almost. Yeah, I think so. Okay, suppose that the car only has one measure, which is the speed. Would you use a car with this information alone? No. Because your aim is not to drive the car. Your aim is to get there where you want to go. Therefore, of course, speed is important. Well-being, where you are now, you can call it quality of life, you can call it well-being, and so on. We know that is a multidimensional concept, and we know how to measure it. But suppose that this is the dashboard of your car. Okay, you have the speed. Great. Then you know how much not only fuel or battery or whatever you have to get where you want to go. This is exactly the different types of capital that you have at your disposal. Human, social, economic, environmental capital. If you run out of them, no way to get where you want to go. Then you want to know also whether your wheels are well balanced, if your tires are working well. If one of the tires becomes, let's say in English, not enough pressure, your car is not balanced anymore. This is exactly inclusiveness. Can you drive with 25% of your people in poverty or at risk of poverty? Then, of course, you need to have a system that checks what the car is doing, which is exactly institutional capacity and quality. It's a sort of the electronic control system that tells you whether the system, which means the car, works or not. So you see what I mean. I don't need to repeat this kind of parallel. We try to look at these different elements, and in theory, through models, we can also try to identify forecasts or make forecasts or scenarios of where we are heading. We calculate the data for European countries between 2011 and 2022. We are updating now. And you have the ranking at the top according to GDP per capita. Then you have the ranking of in terms of sustainable inclusive well-being, and then you have the different elements, including the international spillover effect. If you transfer your polluting industry elsewhere, it looks like you are great, while you are not necessary. You just moved away this kind of problem. As you can see, the picture is much more complex. Is it too complex? Maybe, I don't know. We are talking at the end about 8 different measures, which is a low number compared to what you have in your car dashboard today. And you don't need every single day, every single minute to check all of them. But if something goes wrong, well, something now the car does. In terms of dynamic, as you can see, you have the GDP per capita measured in 2 ways. One is the on the right axis, the growth, the index of classical GDP per capita, and then you have the sustainable and inclusive well-being, the red line, dotted line, and also the well-being today. What does it say? For example, the well-being today, which is the most, the closest figure or concept to GDP, that if you look at the dynamic, it grew more than GDP over the years. And then look at 2020, of course, GDP went down, but the overall well-being didn't have the same reaction. And I think that that was our experience also during the pandemic. Some elements went very badly, other elements, maybe we discovered something different. The rate of divorce increased very much in 2021, as you know very well, but we are talking about just 2020. The different elements of the subjective and inclusive well-being are these ones. And it's interesting to note that over the last couple of years, some of the indicators were worsening. For example, the indicators about nature, but also institutions. What does it mean? That maybe we are now updating the figures, is that maybe some of these signals would have flagged problems to our policymakers before discovering them with a very low turnout at the elections or a shift in the choices by the electorate and so on and so forth. You can imagine what if we could demonstrate, and we are working on that, that according to this concept, Europe is much better than the United States, the China, and others. But think about the relationships with Africa and developing countries, which now we rank as very bad according to GDP, while maybe they are strong or better in some respects than others, other developed countries. What I mean is that our evaluation would change dramatically. Does it mean that we have to abandon GDP? Not, of course, for several purposes. GDP would be extremely helpful, but would GDP respond to our current political pressures and questions? GDP was a great measure at a very low level of development, because together with GDP, a lot of good things happen. Education, health, and so on and so forth. And we shouldn't neglect that over the last 20 years, billions of people were taken out of poverty, for example, in developing countries, although this is going to kill the planet. But the point is that we shouldn't go back to the so-called degrowth or happy degrowth that doesn't exist. The point is to have a set of measures able to look at what is happening. And what about the future? What about sustainability that everybody talks about, but it looks so complicated to achieve? Together with a very dangerous group of environmentalists and communists, you know, Oxford Economics, yes, the Economic Research Center, we did over the last couple of years some simulations for the world and for Italy with different scenarios. For example, this is the summary for Italy. Net zero is the decarbonization by 2050. Net zero transformation is decarbonization plus innovation, including social innovation, investment or social investments at large. Delayed transition is, okay, I will think about this when I'm not the Prime Minister or the head of a company. This is now called, instead of NIMBY, NIMTO, not in my term of office. Now, I absolutely agree that we have to do that, but not when I'm Prime Minister, not when I'm CEO and so on. Someone else will think. In Italy, we have a fantastic band called Pooh with a fantastic song, I Will Think About Tomorrow, okay? So it's, say in English, kick the can down the road, exactly. very bad choice in terms of economic terms, and then climate catastrophe. I will not enter into that, but we can do simulations trying to capture the different elements of well-being. Let me use the last 2 minutes, if I may. I'm still on time, I think, just to tell you what we did in Italy. In 2016, when ASVIS, the alliance, was established, we launched a very crazy idea: change the constitution to include the sustainable development in our constitution. In 2022, it happened that for a combination of things, also while I was minister, the Italian Parliament voted unanimously this change of the constitution. I was in the Parliament listening to the different parties voting declaration. I said, I don't think that they understood what they're doing, but this is a personal note. What they did was to change for the first time ever the principles of our constitution. And now Article 9 says that it is a task of the Republic, not the state, the Republic, everybody, to protect the environment, ecosystems, and biodiversity, also in the interest of future generations. So we included this idea of intergenerational equity that was completely neglected by our constitution. And Article 41 was also changed, and now it says that the economic activity cannot go against several things, that, like in the past, not go against health and environment. And now the first constitutional court decisions are killing some of the legislations that was taken that does not respect this point. On top, we promoted the idea of introducing in the legislative process the check of intergenerational impact of new legislation. And the law that was passed by the Senate and now went to the chamber says at the beginning of this article that the laws of legislation of the Italian Republic promote intergenerational equity. And then it says that each and every new legislation has to be tested before being agreed, voted on the social and environmental impact on future generations. We finally, and I stop here, as Italian Alliance, we launched a new project called Ecosystem Future, just to bring the future at the core of our cultural, political, economic discussions, which is not the case. We are very ambitious and we hope to build several initiatives, but if we don't take the future into our perspective, we are killed every single day by emergencies. And we never think about long term. Let me conclude with a reference to an interview that was given by Tony Blair once he stepped down as Prime Minister. The journalist asked him, how can you learn to be a Prime Minister? And he said that, well, of course, you can study and so on, but then is the practice. And he said that once I went to see Bill Clinton. Clinton was already president, Blair was not yet Prime Minister, and after talking about all the important things of the world, Clinton said to Tony, do you know the secret that I discovered since I'm at the White House? And Blair in the interview says, I thought Area 51, you know, these kind of things that only the president, according to the movies, know. I discovered, he said, that, and I tell you that since the first day that you will sit at your desk in Downing Street, your desk will be full of emergencies. And even if you fix all of them, the following day you will find other emergencies, and so on and so forth. Nobody will remember you for the emergencies that you managed, but only for the important things that you started. And this is the secret. Do you know how can you do important things? Tell me. Devoting time. Because if you will not devote time to important things, you will never make them. I hope that our EU leaders and the world leaders will look at this interview, and I think that what we are talking about here, what Eurofound has been doing, and what European Union can do is really to focus on important things and to improve the sustainable and inclusive well-being, which is what our treaty talks about. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. I think it's fair to say that that was important things that you raised with us today. And I am going to, we have about half an hour for questions, and I am going to open it to the floor. I have one or two. I have to say, just very briefly, you said at one stage, you said, are we trapped by this approach? And then you said again, you sort of said something like, it is political, you know, will they take action? And I suppose you're talking a lot about change, but at the same time, there's this feeling that Europe wants to stay the same. You know, that there's that feeling of we want to protect what we have. We want to be, in some ways, still what we know as being good about Europe. And in that case, I talk very much about the social model. And I was reminded as you were speaking about the leopard of Lampedusa, you know, I was thinking to myself, you know, for things to remain the same, things have to change. And I suppose my biggest question to you is the political will there at European level, across the member states, to allow that dovetailing of the drive towards competitiveness and change, but really allowing us to maintain what is good about Europe?
I believe that the situation is extremely difficult because for several reasons. And the main reasons are very well described in the book Retrotopia, or Retrotopia, by Zygmunt Bauman, where he wrote, we human beings have made incredible jumps in our history. We left the caves to become farmers, and then we built cities, and then we built states, and then supranational states, and so on. Every time that we did these jumps, we increased the concept of us, reducing the concept of them. With globalization, everybody's us. But, he said, the previous jumps were made in hundreds, if not thousands of years. Now we are doing this jump in 40 years. Most of the people don't have really the cultural capacity of doing that or of accepting that. Therefore, retrotopia, the utopia of going back. When the euro was not there, China was not there, immigrants were not there, and so on and so forth. I tried to respond to that book with my book, Sustainable Utopia. But I think that this is really the core of the story. We are moving so quickly that we don't have time to change our mindsets or generational mindsets. And again, we have a lot of politicians who are quite old age, if I may say so. They were not trained in this way of thinking. Even the advisors to them, economists and so on, they were not trained in this way, in thinking about complexity. And now it looks that we delegate artificial intelligence to decide what to do because the world is too complicated. I think that we individually now tend to use artificial intelligence to summarize complex stuff, just to be quick. We are losing our capacity of addressing complexity. And we are looking for quick and dirty solutions that are not
And
solutions.
we're not devoting that time that you were talking about that is necessary.
So I'm biased indeed. I'm in this perspective. I like complexity. I recognize complexity. While I was minister, especially second time, I had the opportunity to allocate 104 billion euros in 20 months in terms of infrastructures and other investments. I was Minister of Infrastructure and Transport. But learning from Tony Blair's, let's say, lesson, my son had sent me the reference to that interview the first time that I was minister. I was taking a few hours per week just to try to focus on important things and not urgent things. Mm-hmm. And I think that it helped me in making maybe wrong decisions, but having this kind of approach to complexity and to future. You know that the Minister of Infrastructures, the first thing that he or she has to do is a Zen course, Zen philosophy course, because you know that what you decide will never allow you to open the new railway or whatever. You are the closest thing to the Minister of Future that you can imagine. So you must have a vision, you have to try to build that vision and then of course sell it. The good news is that according to the polls, European people want these kind of things. Want to have not only peace, of course, but changes in the economic system that protect the environment, that improves equality, and this is exactly what people want. But the disconnection between what they want and the type of political answers they look for can be explained only by Bauman's view, in my view. So and more we are scared by the future, more we tend to close ourselves. This is human beings' nature, but this is where politics should try to go beyond what individually people think.
So it's not only beyond GDP, but it's beyond politics. I would like to
beyond current politics.
Beyond current politics, indeed. I would like to go to the audience and make sure that you have time to put your questions. If you have any, please do raise your hand and say who you are and who you represent before you. The gentleman in the back there. There's a mic coming to you now.
Thank you. Thanks. Oh, good afternoon. My name is Noel Cahill from the NESC. It's the National Economic and Social Council in Ireland. Thanks for a fascinating presentation. Maybe if I actually have two questions. One was in your chart of the different indicators, I think the one showing nature was going up for most of the period and then a downturn. You might say actually it's maybe particularly interesting what was, when it was going up, what was behind that. Then a second question, I suppose, and there is always a trade-off between trying to capture complexity on the one hand and maybe on the other hand having something that captures people's attention.
Can you keep your microphone closer, please?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, there is always a trade-off between complexity, capturing the complexity of an issue on the one hand, and on the other hand, having something that's simple enough, well, that will capture people's attention. I just wonder, one other, I suppose, approach that has it's got some attention is, you know, the donut model that tries to show I suppose, where we are in well-being and in living within planetary boundaries. I just wondered, had you any thoughts on the donut model as an approach?
Okay, thank you. That's 2 questions. Are you happy to take them, and then we'll go back to the floor?
Will be easy to answer. The second one is that what has been developed in the donut approach is not only extremely interesting because it brings together the ceiling, which is the natural boundaries, the planetary boundaries, but also the floor, which is the social floor. We must move in this safe operating space and not breaking the wall, the floor or the ceiling. But it's not an easy approach. It's a very reasonable conceptual framework, but then if you want to make it operational, then you are still confronted with either let's say a dashboard of indicators with the issue of number, complexity, simplicity, and so on, or composite indicators, or extension of national accounts, which is very costly, very complicated, because we don't have a single metric. Just transforming the loss of a particular species of butterfly into money values is almost impossible. So we looked, of course, at that approach. We tried to develop something along the lines of what has been done by Diane Coyle, sorry, not by, you mentioned that, by, okay, the creator of Donut, sorry? Kate Raworth. But again, it doesn't solve all the problems. On the issue of indicators, let me say that my first job at the Italian Statistical Office in 1983 was to build a quarterly GDP. And once you build a quarterly GDP, you can build quarterly whatever you wish, because it's a model-based calculation, which is extremely useful. And this should be applied also to the other variables using models and model-based estimates, because if you have a quarterly GDP and indicators on natural dimensions that are annual and come 2 years later, the game is over. So we are continuously biased due to the different timeliness of indicators. This is why we are working at the JRC in order to have also nowcasts, as we say in statistics, of other variables in order to overcome these cognitive bias due to the different timeliness of indicators. A lot of work has been done on measuring natural phenomena. Extremely interesting is the approach to measure ecosystems. So compared to years ago, we made a huge progress, but the point is how to make clear this interlink and negative correlations, of course, between economic, social, and environmental. But to do that, you need models. Data alone cannot answer your question about what kind of policies you need, because you have to evaluate the impact on economic, social, environmental variables simultaneously. The latest book by the Club of Rome Earth for All uses a very complex model, very interesting, not replicable at the national level, but again, we don't have the perfect model even at this stage, notwithstanding the huge investments they made in this perspective.
Thank you. Maria. Mic coming.
Okay, thank you very much, Maria Jepson, Eurofound. That was extremely interesting. I have two questions that are somewhat interrelated and then not again. So going back to GDP, admittedly, at least from Eurofound's perspective, clearly we're looking at living conditions and working conditions, and we don't look at GDP. We look at the well-being more in terms of work and in terms of life, but at the same time, policy-wise, GDP is the driver in terms of a lot of the policies we have at the European level, being with regard to the welfare state, wages, whatever. To a certain extent, a lot of the policies are based on the redistribution of growth, right? So how would you operationalize that way of thinking policies and how we move forward in terms of redistribution growth when you go to a more complex system? I think that would be really useful for us, at least, to think in terms of, we often try to link all our work that we're doing to competitiveness, to kind of more economic factors, where it's kind of easy with working conditions, but going back to the GDP, how strong a driver it is in terms of thinking policy, how can we think these more complex indicators? So that's my first question. The second question is then with regard to the sustainable and inclusive well-being indicator, which has a lot of sub-indicators. And like intuitively looking at this, you could think that there are trade-offs between how they grow, right? So GDP is easy because it goes one way, right? But if you look at this more complex system, suddenly you're more in a system of trade-off, and it's more a question from my side, is aren't we more in a system of trade-offs where we will admit that some will go up, but then others have to go up less? Thank you.
Okay, first question, politicians are used to promise to increase something, jobs, GDP and so on. So you must have something to promise. And if we think that this idea of the well-being today and the well-being tomorrow answers this kind of need, going beyond GDP. But we also have to recognize that our current indicators, for example, on competitiveness and productivity, are completely wrong. Let's take a company that has a certain value added, a certain production function, and a certain amount of employees. Okay. This company decides to move towards a circular economy model, therefore uses, instead of raw materials, reuses wastes of other, okay? In this way, it reduces the cost of the material component. To do that, it needs more people. What about productivity? If the value add remains stable, it goes down, while it reduces its footprint on the planet. Of course, the data available for Italy, for example, showed that companies that went in this direction increased the value added. But you see how wrong is our model? Why? Because, for example, the using of labor cost, unit labor cost indicators of competitiveness are based on the idea that the production function is almost stable and the only dynamic component is labor. In a moment in which, thanks to technologies, the entire production function changes, why are we focusing just on the 25% of the cost, which is the labor cost? By the way, Eurostat has this kind of data. that cover the entire costs, not only the labor costs, but we are not using that. I tried to tell Mr. Draghi when he was preparing his report to pay attention to that. Unfortunately, he didn't. But it's just to say that if we consider that the production function can change so dramatically, the current way of calculating productivity and so on is useless. On the second question, yes, there are several trade-offs. It's the word. And I'm now part of this WHO wide Europe Commission, and so it's not only European Union, on climate and health. We had the first meeting last week in Reykjavik. We had some hearings with the experts in climate change, health, and so on. I left the meeting really scared. We spoke, for example, to Johan Rockström, one of the best experts in climate change, and he was telling us, first of all, that the capacity of the planet to absorb what we are doing is declining very quickly, more quickly than what experts were thinking. But the point is the following. He explained to us that the world is built, the planet works through trade-offs and negative correlations. So if you have a crisis in a particular dimension of planetary health, the others improve. If you have a spike here, the others decline in order to make the system stable. What we are doing is, on the contrary, to forget about these trade-offs, and we have to take them into consideration. Besides the fact that we suppose in our models that the GDP can increase indefinitely, and it has a material dimension. And as you know, if you think that something which is like GDP can grow indefinitely within a limited space, which is our Earth, either you are an economist or you are stupid.
Final question, Barry, before we close up now.
Of course, thank you. Very sincere welcome to Dublin. My name is Barry Colfer, and I work at a think tank here in Dublin. I'm not an economist. I'm just a stupid political scientist.
Stupid.
I know. So I've a question pertaining to. I love Article 3 as well, and I like the fact that was your jumping off point. But I'm curious about. I guess it's about leadership, and I really like what you say about NIM 2. I will use that myself, but not in my term of office. That where does the leadership come from? I'm looking at your model from stability, flexibility, transformative change. Is it politicians? Is it intellectuals? Is it the social partners? There's representatives from the social partners here. Is it citizens? Do you have any thoughts? Thanks.
In 2017, Italy presented its strategy on sustainable development at the high-level political forum at the UN. And we tried to help the government to design it. It wasn't very good, but anyway, this is not the point. The Italian Minister of Environment went to the high-level political forum and presented, and he wanted to have me there. And a person from Thailand asked, oh, great plan, but Minister, Italy is not famous to have a stable government. And this is a plan for the next 15 years. How do you think that you can manage this? The minister turned to me and said, what do I answer? And I said, answer that governments change, the civil society stays. The point is that civil society, even civil society, doesn't resonate in these terms, but each of them the different organizations, trade unions, business associations, are focused on a small piece of the system. Therefore, they're doing their job very well, but they're not bringing this systemic view to the political discourse. And this is why I'm so glad and proud of what we did in Italy with Italian Alliance, which brings together 330 organizations, almost all the Italian civil society organizations, around the 2030 agenda. We know very well that the 2030 agenda is under attack, and the United States just left, and for the Paris Agreement. But this is not the point. The point is that we were able to take the education to the sustainability in all schools, all universities by law. We were able to push for some policies, even change the constitution, as I said. And leadership is not just political leadership. Let me also tell you another bad story in this case. In 2018, end of 17, beginning of 18, the Socialist and Democratic Group at the European Parliament asked a group of experts to design a possible future for European policies. The result was a book, Sustainable Equality, where we tried to propose 100 actions for the future Commission, 2019-2024. I can tell you that most of them have been at least embraced or transformed into practice. For example, the European semester that we designed, that I personally designed, became the European semester of then. Unfortunately, COVID arrived, this killed the whole story and so on. But now the European Commission, although most of the people are the same, are promoting exactly the opposite of what they did over the last years. Everybody says that the Green Deal is dead, although nothing has changed so far. But anyway, so you see, even when you try and maybe succeed, then this doesn't last necessarily forever. Because unless you have people and which pushes in a certain direction, even innovative politicians that tend to follow what people want. And this is a trap of democracy, you could say. On the other hand, I wouldn't give up on democracy just to have a different approach. But let me tell you, last minute, if I may. Our democracy, and this was one of the focus of my 2014 book, Choosing the Future. So my book are Choosing the Future, That Different World, Sustainable Utopia. So you must say I must be a little bit obsessed by these kind of things. In that book, 2014, I talked about the relationships between data, big data, social media, and politics and democracy. The basis of our democracy is the so-called Condorcet theorem, which says that if people make their own opinions on average, right facts, and if they vote independently from each other, the elections are the best way to extract the preferences from a society. But if these two hypotheses do not work anymore, the probability of making mistakes increases as increases the number of people involved in the decision process. What does it mean? That if people don't use right evidence but are subject to fake news, or if they're manipulated, it's much better to make just one person to decide instead of trying to aggregate through elections. It's scaring, right? It's exactly what is happening. So what I'm just saying that the root problems that we have go much well beyond what we are talking about here. Political leadership in a situation, in a democratic situation when the two hypotheses of Condor's theorem don't work anymore, is really rocket science. In this case, it's very complicated. I don't have personally a solution, but this tells you how complicated it is. And civil society can try to represent the factor of continuity and push for solutions in a complex system, which means that they have to go beyond their narrow, respectable and legitimate aim to try to embark even their specific activity within this overall system thinking that is not normally the way in which we behave.
Which goes back a little bit to the gentleman who talked about the need to simplify perhaps around a very complex topic with correct messaging. And I'm thinking also, Massi, the work that you're doing on those who consume their news and their facts via social media and the impact that has on our democracies and trust in our institutions. So it's a never-ending story, certainly. But perhaps in terms of providing perhaps a narrative or a messaging that can be, if possible, vaguely simplified into key messages today, that's part of the job that we have at Eurofound, is to ensure that that is the dissemination of the knowledge, the facts, the evidence base, and I hope this has gone some way to doing that today. But I do think it's only the beginning, and I wish you the best of luck with your crusade. I think as we're driving towards manic competitiveness costing 800 billion or something, isn't that right? I think we're in grave danger of losing sight of many of the aspects that you've raised today, and I think that would be putting Europe in great jeopardy. But on an optimistic note, I hope you enjoyed today. I would like you again to put your hands together for Professor Giovannini, who really has been an inspiration. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
And if you'd like to join us now for some sandwiches and a little glass of something. Thank you.